Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Schneider, and I am the Program Director for Community Health and Economic Resilience Research, also known as SHARE, in the Translational Health Research Center at Texas State University. Thank you for joining us for day 2 of our Copewell Town Hall. If you were with us on Tuesday, welcome back. And if you're joining us for the first time, we're happy that you're here. Once again, we are recording this session and we'll share it along with the day 1 recording on our website after the event. So do please share these recordings with others who might be interested in learning about Copewell as a tool for community resilience. To quickly recap day 1, on Tuesday, the Copewell team from Johns Hopkins University, Dr. John Links, Dr. Tara Kirksell, and Dr. Monica Schock-Spana introduced us to the framework, as well as the tools and resources that jurisdictions and organizations can use to assess their community's functioning before, during, and after disasters. Today, we will hear from folks at 3 different organizations who implemented Copewell in their communities. First, Jennifer Johnson and Sydney Clark will share their experience implementing Copewell at the Tennessee Department of Health. They will hand off to Michelle Morris, who will discuss her experience with the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation. And finally, we will hear from Rex Long, our very own doctoral research associate here at Texas State, about his work with the Capital Area Council of Governments. These use case presentations will give us an applied look into Copewell's implementation, including the successes and challenges that these folks face and the lessons that they learned. Our goal, once again, is to highlight the different contexts in which Copewell can be applied and to reiterate the flexibility of this tool, so you all can envision yourself and your organization applying the framework in your local community. After our use case presentations conclude, we will move into our Q&A, where our audience will again have the opportunity to ask questions of our presenters. As a reminder, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit your questions as they come to mind. You may submit questions throughout any of the presentations. We will collect your questions as they come in, and then we'll answer as many as possible during the Q&A. Finally, we will share the results of our word cloud activity, which did generate some really cool results, I have to say. We'll conclude with final thoughts about implementing Copewell at the local level, as well as some opportunities for engaged support. Part of our goal in doing this town hall is not just to give you access or introduce you to this model, but to potentially help you implement Copewell in your community. So please do stick with us to the end of this session in order to learn more about these opportunities for support. Thank you all again, and I will now turn it over to our first use case presenters, Jennifer and Sydney.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate that. Let me get this going. Okay. All right, and that should be it. So thank you again for the introduction, Jessica. I'm Jennifer Johnson, and I'll be presenting with Sydney Clark, our Disability Preparedness Coordinator, and we will be representing the Tennessee Department of Health and work that we've done here. My official affiliation is with the CDC, the Center for Preparedness and Response. So as we go through here, the findings are just representing our own conclusions and thoughts and not the opinions of the CDC, so to have to get that out of the way. As an overview, we will discuss the background on our process, methods broken up into about 2 steps, or 2 slides rather, and then getting into some of the challenges, how we chose to solve those or mitigate those as best we could, and then next steps for where we are in the project. Right now, we're right at the data collection phase, but we will be speaking to what we intend to do with the data once we close out that data collection process and move forward into solutions generation. So to get started with background, talk about why we chose this, right? So one of my roles at the Tennessee Department of Health in the Emergency Preparedness Program is to be the state lead for jurisdictional risk assessment coordination and getting that project underway. Our last jurisdictional risk assessment, or JRA project, really was a site-specific type of process, meaning we went through data collection tools that were focusing on the health department and the various vulnerabilities, the hazards, and the consequences that the health department would need to contend with for a certain list of hazards. And so it was a very automated system that would print out scores and different things. You have a stoplight kind of format, with the red, yellow, green, and things like that. Able to have a dashboard and visualize. We had mapping and different things, to see this, but it did not target or really capture a lot of community involvement necessarily, or there was no community facing types of elements when it comes to vulnerability. It's mostly within the four walls of the health department. And so we thought that Copewell might be a good way to get at some of those things where we had blind spots, and also to strengthen our recovery planning and things like that when it comes to training and even exercise development, when we're doing scenarios and things like that. It would be a useful data collection process to have community rationale included into how they feel about the communities that they're living in when it comes to vulnerabilities from the community aspect, the non-governmental aspect. So that was the why as to why we focused in on using Copewell. We want to supplement jurisdictional risk assessment data that is really highly quantitative ultimately in nature with some qualitative data. So overall, the goals we would have would be assessing community function in Tennessee the best we can, using that information then to facilitate dialogue around solutions that would be beneficial and targeted in certain areas and things like that. We have a great deal of variety in our state. Our state is long. We're bordered by about 8 or 9 states. And with that, we have 5 metropolitan areas, and almost the rest of it is very rural. So there's big differences in terms of communities and what people would think about their communities, what gaps exist. And so we're hoping to be able to get people's voices into that and understand a little bit more from the mouths of people that are in the community. So through that, we're able to provide resources that they can use to not only identify gaps, but have some solutions involved and generated with strong facilitation. So that's part of the goals of the overall project as we progress with that. So getting into methods, I'll let Sydney take over from here, and she's going to discuss with us or share with you all why we chose the 2 self-assessment tools that we did and why we chose a stepwise kind of format before getting into the process and things. So Sydney, if you're ready to go, let me know and I'll progress the slides for you.
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. All right. So basically the way we started was we examined the framework of Copewell, looked at all the different pieces to sort of figure out what we wanted to use to supplement our previous JRAs. Like Jenny said, we were very site specific, so we wanted to figure out which ones would be best to get community responses. And so then we sort of sat down and said, okay, well, these pieces sort of cover stuff we've already collected information on, like emergency management. So what ones would be the best fit for what we want to do? And so we ended up selecting the population vulnerability, inequality, and deprivation tool and the social cohesion, our social cohesion rubric. Next slide, please. So we moved forward and we were trying to decide how we wanted to collect this data. We, knew that our regions are very busy and wear a lot of hats. So we didn't know if the focus group thing would work very well for us. So we tried to pinpoint some audiences and some groups that we could target potentially for a survey. And so we decided to work with our Health Disparities Task Force, which is basically a statewide meeting that meets every week, has about 1,400 members and represents all different types of people in our communities, faith-based organizations, state government, local government, healthcare, and many more than that. And then that sort of snowballed into people hearing about what we were doing and sending it on to different state advisory committees. So we have a hazard and mitigation committee that we've sent it to, our local health councils, different disability organizations in the state. So it's gone to a lot of places, and we're still working on collecting survey responses and stuff like that. As far as survey development, we converted the rubrics that Copewell has into surveys. So we had a description or a definition of each element. So population vulnerability had a definition, inequality had a definition, and so on, just so people could get an idea of what those things are exactly, because they're very broad categories. Then we also had an option for them to see examples of what a community would look like with low capacity for that in their community and optimal capacity. Um, and then we also wanted to make sure to make it as accessible as possible. So we had text to speech options for people that might be useful for, and we made sure it was screen reader compatible. And then the way we wanted to collect that data was we have a scale from 1 to 10, and each person would rate their community in that element from 1 to 10, and then they have a chance to explain why. So in social cohesion, we could look at community involvement, and someone could give their community an 8, and they could say, well, we have a lot of organizations and people are really involved, and there's a lot of civic engagement and that sort of thing, just to see where they're coming from and why they rated their community what they did. And then next slide, please.
Okay.
And then some of our challenges, converting the rubrics into plain language. These rubrics are, I think, practitioner based, and so a lot of the stuff in there would not be very conducive to public facing surveys. So we had to go through and sort of change stuff to be a little bit more user friendly. So me and Jenny sat down for a while and went through and changed stuff and made sure to not lose what we wanted it to say, but made it a little bit more understandable. The next challenge was finding an appropriate timeline. So we don't really have a specific deadline for this project, but we wanted to make sure to get it out there so that we could collect information, because it's an exciting process and we wanted to go ahead and kick it off. So we had some, I wouldn't say issues, but just a little hiccups in distribution and when we were going to close the survey and that sort of thing, and how long we wanted to keep it open. And then segmenting our responses for virtual focus groups. We weren't really sure how we wanted to do this, if we wanted to do it by region, by county. So we ended up deciding to have all the responses put in their zip code, so that we could sort of segment them that way. And then the big one is that we're going to get a lot of information from these, and it's probably going to be beyond what the preparedness department at the Tennessee Department of Health can handle. It's going to be, we're going to have to bring in a lot of people to sort of work on ways to address the issues and gaps that we found with our data collection. Next slide. So we want to use this information to inform future planning, training, and exercises. So just have these gaps that we've identified, get all of our people that have taken the survey together and sort of have a very collaborative solution generation, which is also on this slide. We want people to be involved. This is community facing, so we want them to have their voices heard in how we address these things when it comes to emergencies and disasters. And then also just create relationships. As I mentioned before, we've sent this out to a lot of people and a lot of different types of people and community members. So we feel like a lot of new relationships will be formed going forward that would be very useful and beneficial. And then we want to sort of have a phased approach with Copewell. So we've chose these two, but we want to maybe every year, every other year, bring in the next element or and create another survey and send that out so we can use Copewell to its like full ability and make sure that we have consistent data collected on all of these. And that's it for us. And we'll pass it off to Michelle.
Sounds good. I'll stop sharing. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to get to join you all. I'm joining you from Duluth, Minnesota. So the group that I'm part of, it's a community foundation, but we're part of a much larger network. Let's see, I get my slides to advance here. Here we are. So just to give you a little perspective on place. So we're located in northeastern Minnesota and also serve northwestern Wisconsin. So it's a very large geographic area, serving over 10 counties across the state borders. And then we also serve 7 Indigenous nations. I'm part of a network called Ready North, and it's a unusual group. It brings together emergency management, nonprofits, our local government. So it very key public-private partnerships, all with the purposes of exchanging information, coordinating on planning, garnering resources, and working together to advance disaster resilience, as well as the broader life cycle of disasters for mitigating, preparing for, responding to, and recovering from disasters. Our group also has a particular focus on serving our most marginalized populations, to make sure that our communities are resilient when we face disasters. So deciding to use Copewell, our communities have experienced quite a lot over the years. We've had severe flash flooding in 2012. We, believe it or not, in the Midwest, we are a coastal community with Lake Superior. So we do have significant storms and coastal flooding. We've also had an oil refinery explosion that resulted in large evacuations. We've had train derailments, one of which caused a benzene exposure. And all of that has taken a lot of effort in our communities to come together to recover, and has created a lot of engagement around how our communities can be better prepared, more resilient, and be working together to mitigate disasters. So you'll see the image here on the right of our network and the level of connectedness. So we've had the opportunity to get to work together with the Funders Network. This is a network of philanthropic organizations across the country. And in particular, we're in a cohort of about 20 community foundations across the Midwest, all working on disaster resilience. And through both their information sharing as well as grants that we've received through the Funders Network, we've had the opportunity to work together with an organization called Network Impact, who's been helping us to organize our efforts and really operate under the principles for developing and maintaining strong networks. So as we were thinking of how to be coming together and targeting what we were going to do as a network, had a conversation with one of our partners at a local hospital, and she came across an article about Copewell. So we decided to reach out and see what our local data look like for where we should be focusing. This happened to be very early in the work of Copewell, and we had the privilege of getting to partner with Copewell in piloting the community functioning self-assessment and materials. So we were trying to think of how to best go about the process. So we landed on using a triangulated approach of the histogram data across our counties. Our counties are very large. And so, for example, in St. Louis County, we have very differing communities across the northern part of the county, where the that Boundary Waters, if you've ever been, it's a very beautiful area, but also very remote, all the way down to Duluth, which is considered more of an urban area. So trying to think of how we would use the histogram data of our counties in understanding, and recognize that we need to also dig deeper for a more local perspective. So we did surveys, and then we also held it. Thankfully, this was before the pandemic, so we were able to more easily hold in-person workshops. And so in bringing together across all data from all three areas, we felt we were able to get a clearer picture of where our network needed to focus on improving community functioning. Some of the considerations that we found important was thinking of who was included in the assessment. That definitely changes the results. And I think that's an area too, in thinking of who's not included and what that means for the data. In our areas, we do find significant inequities and disparities. And so realizing that we needed to take a very deep and intentional focus in thinking of who's involved, because that significantly changes the results. Thinking of for most people, or for the majority, we seemed like we were doing okay, but when we looked deeper where those inequities were, we have a lot of challenges. One of the other considerations is intersecting boundaries. So across our network, we have some partners who are just representing, for example, the city of Duluth. Other partners are recognizing all of northern Minnesota and all of northern Wisconsin. And then the Community Foundation has a more specific 10 county and 7 Indigenous nation reach. So across our intersecting boundaries, what does that mean? And knowing that there can be a lot of fluidity even across the state border that separates our communities. So recognizing what that means in the data as well. We also found that varying the engagement practices was important for trying to meet the needs of our audiences. So who was able to participate in surveys versus who was able to participate in the workshop, and trying to provide multiple avenues for engagement. We also found that translating the assessment results into interventions was needed a lot of thought. And this was also very early in the piloting for Copewell. So I know that a lot of progress has been made on that too. But the data was very helpful in thinking of how we were going to be setting priorities with our group. Some of the successes, we were able, using the Copewell model, gave us a much clearer understanding across our Ready North partners of what we meant when we were talking about disaster resilience, and where we were going to focus. So thinking again across our broad audience, from emergency managers to our nonprofit service organizations, and kind of the background and expertise that each of those bring in, and how to create a shared understanding. This was also very important during the pandemic, so that we were able to really understand what one another was saying, and understand the needs that our communities were facing. In terms of collaborative responses to impacts of the pandemic, again, we found the work that we've been doing with Copewell to be very helpful as we were going about setting up recovery funds, and found early on in conversations that our community members were really struggling with figuring out where to go for help. So we were able to come together and mobilize the development of a resource guide, and also a mental well-being guide. So having the relationships and understanding the flow of social cohesion into community functioning helped us be able to activate more quickly and effectively. we found that this collective action also helped us be able to secure resources more quickly too. So getting funding into mental health and mental wellness, and also how to build up greater food access, especially when our community was in crisis. So just an overview of some of the outcomes that we've identified and are working toward after going through the Copewell community functioning assessment. We are looking at improving the transition between emergency response and recovery, especially building up an understanding of an equitable approach. Building up the capacity for our emergency managers to recognize how to go about being more equitable in their practices. And thankfully, we've been able to build up a lot of trust and creating spaces for more humility and vulnerability. So we were hearing from our emergency managers and hospital systems that this was something that they were interested in and wanting to be building up. So again, that relationship piece has been absolutely vital in moving this work forward. We've also created a very strong working group within our network focused on preventing future stormwater damage. We've also been looking at how to build up the resilience of our nonprofit organizations, especially those that are really key to vital services. So having them, building up the preparedness of those organizations and helping them be able to continue functioning, as well as looking at how to be increasing resources for disaster recovery. And again, drawing from the information from our partners across the Midwest, looking at some exciting work there in insurance access. We've also been looking at how we strengthen social and psychological well-being, again, partnering with University of Wisconsin-Superior, our local hospital systems. There's so many partners, and the collaborative spirit has just been phenomenal. We've also been looking at how to increase our connectedness and understanding of resources. So again, thinking of where are those relationships that our community members have, and how do we strengthen those. Some of the reflections from this work, the Copewell framework has been tremendously helpful in building a shared understanding, using the same language and understanding what we're all talking about, and singling in on our focus areas. It's such a complex area, and having the Copewell framework has really helped us find direction. Sharing experiences across differing perspectives has been very helpful as we think of how to be finding solutions. By sharing the experiences across such a broad range, it really helps us, I think, gain a deeper understanding of what our community's needs are, and then also has brought up more exciting and maybe innovative approaches for solutions. We've found that the connection between social cohesion and community functioning has been, it's hard to even find the words. The pandemic has really pointed out just how key having those relationships have been, both between organizations as well as at a personal level, that our community functioning improvements wouldn't be happening if we didn't have that social cohesion. I heard a colleague use the phrase building at the speed of relationship and trust, and I felt it was important to reiterate that the work doesn't happen if we don't have the trust across our partnerships, and building up that relationship that we can have very sincere conversations and explore ideas together. So that relationship building has just been pivotal. establishing a baseline to evaluate our progress has been very key with Copewell. Understanding where we've come from, where we're going, and how we look at what we've been able to accomplish. And then I think one of the most important things that we've seen is bringing together people who are not usually connecting. So the Ready North Network had started this work, but Copewell was really a way to be visualizing and bring intentionality around who we were inviting in and how we were sharing out information and making sure that everyone recognized that we all have a role to play in building our community's disaster resilience. So grateful for the Copewell team and their partnership and where our communities are headed together. And Rex, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. I'll share in just a second. And while I share, I just wanted to quickly say how excited I am to see in your work the representation of disability inclusion and mental health. I feel like these are two areas that are chronically underrepresented in our work. So I'm very just happy to see that spotlighted. So hello, everyone. My name is Rex Long, and I'm an applied anthropologist and doctoral research associate for the Translational Health Research Center here at Texas State University. And today I'd like to share the work of my colleague, Emily Rapaski, and I. And as a note, this will differ a little bit from our other panelists in that this work represents a little bit more of a stepping stone to eventual Copewell use. And so as part of this, I'll walk through our partners in this work, our project goals, some of the examples of the work that we have engaged in to date, and what we see as kind of the future of this work. So speaking to our partners, we primarily worked with the Homeland Security Planner for the Capital Area Council of Governments, or CAPCOG, though we really began this project by connecting with the Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for the City of Austin. And a special shout out to the Copewell team because they really helped facilitate this connection and partnership. So in working with CAPCOG, which represents a 10-county region here in Central Texas, we really sought to evaluate the alignment of their goals with Copewell implementation. And the ideal is to then use the City of Austin as something of a pilot test for wider adoption of the Copewell model. And of course, there were many factors that made our partners interested in a tool like Copewell, but certainly for us, Winter Storm Uri a few years back and the ongoing pandemic certainly played a role. And at the time, the winter storm in particular represented an unlikely but catastrophic disaster event that impacted our entire state. And so with events like Winter Storm Uri in mind, the overall stated goal, especially from our City of Austin partner, was to really rethink at a high level what holistic and long-term resilience and recovery can look like. And it was expected that this goal requires getting away from the somewhat standard perceptions and approaches to preparedness and response efforts, as these are often focused most on that acute phase after a hazard occurs and that attempt to quickly return to status quo. And unfortunately here, the ongoing recovery of communities is not as large of a focus. And with all of this in mind, our partners did anticipate that this would be a long-term goal that would have to outlive their own tenures in their departments. So in general, we were hoping to put into place a mindset that would live well into the future and continue this work. Also, while we were goal setting, we quickly found a need to interrogate our definitions of community, particularly as it pertains to the people that are involved in these recovery efforts. Just through discussion with our partners, we were able to touch on, for example, how the business sector might often be used or included to quickly restore economic health in a community. But that sector can be involved in community health beyond the acute phase of a hazard event. And so if we start talking about that group earlier and how to better and more holistically include them, we also find that that group interfaces with X and Y groups, which goes on to spur thoughts of how we can better include those groups that may have never been included in recovery efforts to begin with. And so just through this process of conversation, we started to think through how we could build up a network of stakeholders. And that thought, as well as the thoughts of the panelists before me, just prompts me to reiterate what I see as a key Copewell encouragement, which is getting groups and agencies to think in a whole of community framework so that we are applying interventions at the community level aligned with community stated needs. Another very critical goal for us in this process, which I will say also introduced some resistance and challenge to using Copewell, was to avoid the duplication of existing efforts, which of course is a very understandable goal. It was expressed to us that many CAPCOG jurisdictions face an extremely high workload as it is. So there was concern that taking on Copewell would simply add to existing requirements, and especially those that might be tied to compliance with funding mechanisms. And there were two processes in particular that CAPCOG indicated to us as serving perhaps an existing and equal purpose to Copewell, and that we wanted to avoid reinventing the wheel, so to speak. And those are the Threat Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment, or THIRA, and the Stakeholder Preparedness Review, or SPR. Both of these reports require jurisdictions to collect a great deal of information about their counties and in a fairly exhaustive manner. And these really guide annual planning and reporting efforts, so they are of key importance to our communities. And THIRA in particular is an interesting case because it does consist of the reporting and forecasting along 32 core capabilities as outlined by FEMA. It is, of the two, probably the most exhaustive of these processes. So taking in these goals and the concerns about existing work and requirements, we realized that we really needed to better visualize how Copewell might be used. As John mentioned on Tuesday, Copewell is kind of a fire hose stream of information, and the framework can be a bit overwhelming at first blush. And that can make it difficult to fully digest how Copewell can be used in a locality. But this was really formative in helping us decide on our direction for assessment activities. And I'll visualize these items for you in just a moment. But we first proposed to our partners developing a crosswalk comparing the ongoing efforts of our partners with the Copewell model. And to help with this, our CAPCOG partner very generously shared with us their most recent THIRA document, which allowed us to stake out our own analog for indicators or measures, making it easier to compare to Copewell both generally and granularly. And then in building our preliminary assessment report, we also took the computational model data from Copewell to provide an average of the 10-county region and just Travis County, which is where Austin is located for our non-Texas folks. We were then able to compare those results with our crosswalk so that at a high level, we could kind of test our own goodness of fit to the approach. And now to visualize just a bit. This is a sample of our crosswalk, which we built very low-tech in Excel. And as you can see, we have our THIRA elements on the left and Copewell along the top. And as a quick example of our own analog for indicators or measures, you can see on the THIRA side, community resilience is an example of a core capability. And these other items, community awareness and networking, preparedness campaigns, partnership with other government partners, those are the indicators that we were able to build out based on how CAPCOG had built their THIRA. And so in the crosswalk itself, we would mark an X for areas we saw an overlap. We placed a 1 in what we saw as perceived gaps so that we could very quickly generate a rough and ready count for our gap areas. And this also served a dual purpose of helping us identify potential areas of focus for future implementation efforts. And this is our presentation of the computational model data with the 10-county area on the left and Travis County on the right. We used the table output from Copewell, which Tara showed for us on Tuesday, and we reduced the data shown to just the normalized values of those high-level domains. And we did find that 2 of the 3 domain gap areas that we identified in our crosswalk aligned with lower scoring areas in the 10-county averages and the Travis County averages, suggesting that we did indeed find a couple of good areas for us to dive deeper. Now, unfortunately, this work is currently paused, but I still wanted to share our general and expected next steps. First, this preliminary assessment is based on mine and Emily's understanding of things. So the first critical next step is to engage in a dialogue with our partner to ensure that we selected appropriate measures for thyra and that we didn't misinterpret areas of overlap or gaps. Then, because we did identify gaps across a comprehensive crosswalk, we have the ability to get more granular into any of those 3 domains and further narrow down for our partners where we could focus assessment and implementation efforts, so we're not necessarily throwing the whole Copewell model at a jurisdiction. And from there, we would really strive to embody that whole of community approach to ensure that necessary stakeholders are involved in our assessment activities so that we develop those community-minded recommendations. And as we saw with our other panelists, this would likely involve an adaptation of our Copewell assessment tools. It can be difficult to get people in the same room at the same time, especially if we have multiple stakeholders at play across multiple sites. But as we heard from Jennifer and Sydney, it is not entirely difficult to transition these tools to a survey or to adapt to informational interviews and still use those data that get at the core of what Copewell is measuring to pull out both common insights as well as those key differing perceptions that need to be addressed in communities. And this brings us a bit to the future. So engaging in this Copewell work is what really enabled Emily and I to begin our work with the Translational Health Research Center and to start building a partnership and relationship with the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and the Copewell team, which goes on to spark ideas of how our center as a research supporting institution might contribute to the sustainability of Copewell. And as a couple of very quick examples, those include convening events like this, where we can help expand the awareness and hopefully use of Copewell in a state like Texas, and to provide other support opportunities that Jessica will address in our closeout. And then last, this is slightly more of a personal future effort, but I really see value in standardizing our crosswalk approach as a tool to assess whether Copewell is a good fit for communities before they deploy too many resources into this really amazing but also large scale effort. And this crosswalk, I think, also provides an opportunity to really quickly identify targets for initial assessments and implementation efforts. And I think I am roughly at time, so I'll quickly leave you guys with just a contact for our center if any Texas-based folks would like to reach out to us and learn even more about Copewell or our efforts. And I would like to extend a personal thanks to our panelists. We're so thankful that you were able to join us and share your experiences. And I think, Emily, we can turn now to Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Rex. Okay, hello, everyone. So my name is Emily Rapaski. I'm a research associate at the Translational Health Research Center at Texas State University. I'm going to be moving us through the Q&A session today. So first and foremost, though, I'd like to thank our presenters. So thank you so much, Jennifer, Sydney, Michelle, and Rex. We really appreciate you sharing your experiences using Copewell and also how you adapted the tools to meet your community's needs. So I want to take some questions from the audience as well. So if you haven't submitted anything in the Q&A and you have questions, go ahead and do that now using the Q&A feature on Zoom. We're going to try to get to as many as possible, and our team has also prepared some questions too if we have time. So let me look here at the Q&A box. Let's see, we've got one question here, but I'm going to go ahead and move into this question about how, so we talked a lot about how Copewell emphasizes including the whole community and representatives from multiple sectors in the implementation process today. So I was wondering if any of you can offer any recommendations on how to best incorporate community stakeholders and partners in working with Copewell. And can you also elaborate on how you approach these partners to engage in activities and any challenges that you may have encountered in bringing them into the process?
Sure, I'm happy to talk to some of that if you can. So yeah, this is Jenny with the Tennessee Department of Health. One really important and valuable stakeholder that we already have an existing relationship with, the TDH, is our Director of Faith-Based and Community Liaison. Like, she is under our, her name is Elizabeth Hart. She's under our Office of Minority Health and Disparities Elimination at TDH. So that is the point of contact that we leverage to get access to the Health Disparities Task Force. This is a group that meets weekly, and Sydney alluded to this during her section of the presentation. They meet very frequently, very regularly, and they are super engaged and very passionate. They formed during COVID-19. And so that group began maybe in the lower, maybe mid to just a few hundred people, if you would, which is already significant, but now it has grown to over 1,400. And we hadn't known that until, you know, we started to talk a little bit more deeply with Elizabeth about how, in fact, it has grown. So this group represents diversity, not only in geographical areas, so we have rural, metropolitan, and everything between there. Also, in terms of the groups that people serve, but also are members of as well. So that's faith-based or political officials in there in some of these jurisdictions that we have. They represent actual constituents. Then we have faith-based leaders that are, you know, pastors and things. These are the same groups that would organize points of dispensing for vaccines during COVID-19. So they're a highly engaged group and very passionate about serving their communities, also healthcare as well as education, K through 12, university, you know, everything you can think of just about, including groups that represent people with disabilities. And so that was, I wouldn't say low-hanging fruit, but it would ultimately, the best thing to do for us was leverage existing relationships that already were there. That's ultimately what I'm saying. So starting there and then branching out from there with our, of course, with our own relationships, but getting deeper into how wide ranging that is. We use the Healthcare Disparities Task Force primarily, and then now moving beyond that to the state advisory committees and other engaged groups that we honestly didn't know about. They just heard what we were doing, and so it's words travel fast. So that's what I'll say, and I'll stop in just in case others want to jump in.
Thank you so much for that. Does anybody else have anything to add?
I think just building on what Jenny said, utilizing the relationships that already exist. Again, having that trust is so key for getting very open engagement. So maybe just to plug, don't be afraid to partner with your local community foundations. We can be organizations that partner with a lot of different people and a lot of different organizations. So thankfully we had a lot of relationships in the community. We're able to then utilize their trusted relationships. One of the pieces that we also at first kind of struggled to get a handle on was, are you answering this for yourself, or are you answering this like on behalf of people you work with? And so maybe that would just be one piece to kind of call out too. And I think if we could go back offering incentives to participate, to eliminate barriers, like to attend the workshop, for taking time to complete the survey, I think that also would have helped us in our engagement processes. So if you have resources for that, maybe just a plug to try to utilize that too.
Fantastic, thank you. So, and just also to bring Rex into the conversation, is there anything that you are thinking about as far as if whenever the project continues about bringing in community stakeholders or community groups, partners, or how are you seeing that might be incorporated into your plans?
Well, I think picking up on what both Michelle and Jennifer mentioned, I think we have to really suss out those existing relationships and make sure we're taking not advantage, but we're making full use of what exists. You know, going back to that idea of not reinventing the wheel, not making things more difficult than they need to be. And I also think that, you know, we have to pay attention to the ways in which, since this is a whole of community approach, a lot of our misrepresented and unrepresented communities have been frequently harmed by healthcare systems, government systems, other community systems. So we have to make sure that we are dedicated to putting in the work to build trust before we can even get participation in these events from community.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And I want to move over to my Q&A box from the audience. I wonder if any of you can speak to this question about if it says, how have you seen or do you imagine a region could use Copewell to stand up a COAD or a VOAD? And a VOAD is a voluntary organization assisting in disaster. So do any of you have any experience working with one of these or have any recommendations on how that could be possible for a region?
I'm happy to add in. So our Ready North network, we don't have a co-ed in our area. So our Ready North network is very much filling the role of a co-ed. So maybe that's a similarity to draw there. And we did find the COPWELL model very helpful in how we went about our planning processes for where we were going to be working together.
Any other thoughts on VOADs?
Maybe I'll just add, we have a state VOAD, and so we do work with our state VOAD partners then to kind of loop them in what our local network is doing. And when we have, for example, there's been flooding in northern Minnesota this spring and summer. So we were able to connect with our state VOAD and be able to have those connections with our essentially co-ed. And COPWELL has been helpful there. I think staff turnover has been one of the challenges that we've had, but COPWELL has been that helpful framework in kind of onboarding new partners as well.
Thank you so much. I do have one other question, and maybe Rex might potentially be able to give some insight into this one. The question is, would Texas State University be interested in partnering with other Texas universities in this effort?
So I won't speak entirely on the behalf of my organization, but I would say that generally, we're always open to exploring potential collaborations. I think, university-based partners, we are our own kind of community too. And I think we have to make sure that we are interfacing with one another. And Texas is a big state. So if we're not able to work with a community partner in a different region, if we can say, hey, I know this other research group that is really interested in this work, and we can make those connections, I think, yeah, I would say we're always open to exploring what those options are.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's see, I have another question. I think this is for all of you. Would any of you be available as something of a peer mentor, or even just for an informational interview?
I certainly would be. I intend to, even myself, intend to reach out to folks on this call myself to see some peer-to-peer assistance. Cindy, I've been texting on the side like, yeah, we need to talk to Rex a little bit. So yeah, I'm always open to that kind of thing. Interested to do some more deep dive and have some sidebar conversations. So feel free, ping me, absolutely.
I'm also happy to help. I feel like that's one of the great pleasures with this work is that the collaboration and willingness to share and learn from one another has helped all of us be able to advance. So happy to share, and also look forward to learning from everyone too.
Absolutely. And just to add to the chorus of yes, it's another yes, because I think it's another good example of the ways that we kind of have our own responsibility to make sure that this work continues into the future. And so I think it behooves us to be available to people.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're also planning to set up some sort of networking thing for this COPWELL adventure. So hopefully we'll be able to connect everybody that's been here in the audience with our panelists as well. So I'm going to move on to another question. So you all talked about some challenges that you faced in implementing COPWELL in your communities. For example, I remember Sydney saying something about converting the self-assessment rubrics into plain language. So thinking back on these sorts of experiences, are there any recommendations that you would offer to other jurisdictions or organizations that might make their experience using these more streamlined and easier?
I can offer, well, when it comes, speaking for us, yeah, when it comes to, that was a struggle for us. And I think a lot of it has to do with just how close we are with our environmental epi team. And they do quite a bit of plain language training very consistently. And it's like, we don't want to run afoul of certain rules to make this, because we do know how wide, and you just never know where the survey will land as well. People share links, all these kinds of things. So we just try our best to get ahead of that by testing it out with people. So, sending it out, like just, test it out prior to extensive testing. So not only just, the EPIs and different folks like that for the data quality, we understand that, but just if you had to give this to your aunt, would you have to give this to your nephew? Would you, like, how much would they comprehend? Would this be a struggle for these folks? Let us know, because sometimes we just, we have our blinders on and those kind of things. When it comes to, plain language and language we read and see and write every single day. So that was a big piece of it, just making sure it is accessible to various educational levels. And then it's also just accessible just in terms of abilities to even consume or access to information. Will the screen reader read this? If people are blind or low vision, will they be able to access this? And so the text to speech functionality, we wanted to, apply that accessibility to it, but just always testing that out too. Can you do this? Does the screen reader read this appropriately? Does it read it what is actually on the screen, and having people test that for you. So it goes back to leveraging those relationships and, again, and just saying, will this work for as many people as possible? So that helped us out, I think, quite a bit. We're kind of still, though we are in the middle of our process right now, we'll see, when we're getting feedback, pretty consistently, even as we are implementing this, how is it working for you, or how is it not? And I think all of that is good information to have, and just keep a CQI kind of, quality improvement mindset. Like, next time we know to tweak it this way, if we were going to, especially if we're doing a phased approach. So I would say that.
And I just wanted to say too, this is Sydney, if any of the people in the audience do want to move forward with like surveys or whatever, if you guys want it to be tested for like accessibility stuff, that's something I do for the Tennessee Department of Health. So I would be more than happy to do that for you all as well. So I'm assuming you guys will probably get my contact info. So if that's something you're interested in, I'm more than happy to do that too.
Yes, thank you for plugging that. It sounds like pilot testing these things like the surveys is really important. All right, so I'm going to move on to my next question. So was there at any point, throughout these processes that you've been going through with Copewell, where you solicited guidance or additional resources from the Copewell team? And if so, what was most beneficial?
So, sorry, the question was seeking guidance from the Copewell team.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind, I can speak to that a little bit. I know when we were building our crosswalk, a big question that we had in looking at the data, Copewell's really good about putting their summary of measures on their computational data model. And we know that they pull from various county level census data and so forth. But every now and then we would run across a question about what it was exactly that was being measured, what it was that was being involved in a particular indicator. And so we were able to ask the team, and do you have, it can be a one pager, it can be just a blurb, just anything that helps us understand what it is that's being captured. And the Copewell team very generously provided us with that information. And I think moving forward, that kind of information is very useful to have. As a quick example, I think one of the indicators is vaccine uptake for flu, for example. And so, yes, obviously that data measures just that, but it also serves as a proxy for the ability of a community to deliver needed vaccine in a time of emergency. You can kind of use that as a baseline indicator for more than just flu. And so it's useful to be able to know what things serve as a proxy so that when you're targeting something, you can expand beyond like the literal item being measured.
Those explanations seem like they'd be very helpful when trying to use the rubrics and things. Does anybody else have anything to add about guidance from the Copewell team or any additional resources they looked at?
Yeah, I was going to say we've had multiple meetings with the team. Even when we just talked about testing our survey, we sent it to Tara and she sent it to the rest of the Copewell team, and they got back to us with feedback and stuff. And so they're super interested in being involved and assisting in any way. So they're awesome.
Just reiterating oh, sorry, Jenny, go ahead.
I was just agreeing with Sydney. That sums it up pretty good. They let us, I pinged them probably more than they would have preferred. And those are my words, not theirs, but they were super helpful and responsive, and letting us know that we can adapt these tools as how we need to without any kind of, loss of, integrity to the process, or, there's no real like allegiance, I guess, they let us know like, no, you can adapt this as you need to for your jurisdiction. That was something we kept kind of checking in on because we can go rogue in Tennessee sometimes. So, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think just building on what's been said, it was such a pleasure to get to work with the Copewell team. we from when we first emailed asking if we could get more information on our local communities, and opening up then into being able to pilot the community functioning assessment together. And I think that shared learning was it was so helpful in thinking of how in organizing the implementation, how do we meet our community's needs, and how do we, I think to the earlier points, how do we maintain the integrity of the tools? And yeah, phenomenal experience working with the Copewell team.
Awesome, thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest points that we're trying to stress is that Copewell materials and tools are just so adaptable and they're so flexible to your community's needs. So you can kind of mold them however you need to. Okay, so let's see, I have a couple more questions. So based on your experiences working with the framework and the tools, how do you expect to, or do you expect to continue using Copewell in the future for strengthening community resilience? And if so, what do you sort of expect that to look like moving forward?
So we, like I mentioned in our presentation, we plan on sort of doing a phased approach with all of the different elements. So like I said, we are doing the population vulnerability, inequality, and deprivation, and then social cohesion right now, but we want to sort of do a phased approach in the years to come of the other aspects of the tool and everything. So that's kind of what we are planning on doing right now. And Jenny probably has more to add to that.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Sydney. Yeah, so we do intend to do that, and also I guess keep in mind how often we are going to the same wells for the same water, I guess, when it comes to like the assessments and things, because as we come out of response mode, I guess, or pandemic response mode, to parse it out from other response modes that you may be in, we are now getting back into exercises and preparedness phase type things. So what we have now discovered is that there's assessments going on, like assessments are back. So we're not the only skin in the game when it comes to that kind of thing. So and so during this process, we discovered that, and that was an important finding, so that we're not, you know, because we all want whole community involvement, whole community engagement and input and feedback and all these things. And so that we're not taxing, we're looking to see where we can unify some efforts as well. So we have a policy unit that's doing assessments. Can we tag along and maybe add some items in here that relate to Copewell resilience into your assessment, so that is an efficient kind of thing, not overly burdensome, but so it's not you go, then we go, or we all go at the same time, you know, just working together so we can, you know, centralize some of that stuff. Here in Tennessee as well as we move forward, not only from the health department, but also, as Rex mentioned, our emergency management and homeland security folks, or THIRA and all those things. So even within the health department, we have assessment groups, but then also from outside other state government groups who are also doing the same thing. So just maintain relationships and visibility on that is something we plan to do too, so we don't overtax, you know, the masses, I guess, with data collection. So,
right.
Building on that, we're very much in the implementation phase. So looking at what actions we're taking, what we're really doing to increase our local community functioning, and looking at resilience in our communities. So as we're making progress on those actions, also being very intentional with communications. To share back with the people who were involved in the assessments and beyond, in what Ready North is doing, where we're making progress, and where there are more opportunities to become involved. So I think that's another piece of trying to not just extract information, but also share back what we're actually doing, and I think that'll also help us as once we complete this part of the implementation phase and head back into assessment. Hopefully that helps with engagement too, so people will be excited about sharing again, and kind of keep the improvements flowing.
Awesome.
I'll go ahead, Emily.
No, go ahead, Rex.
So just to quickly add, you know, right now our work is paused with our current partners, so we're always eager to start that back up. But I think for us, continuing the work is, you know, expanding the partners that we do work with. And in general, I wanted to reiterate a point that Michelle made in her presentation, which is, as we engage in these efforts, I think a critical forward-looking piece we need to include is that evaluative arm. You know, it's well and good to come up with actionable recommendations, but we have to actually measure the progress that we make towards them, so that not just for us, but also for our communities. And getting back to your idea of sharing back, like we need to be able to demonstrate that growth and that change.
All very good points and fantastic insight. Thank you all so much. Are there any other closing remarks or comments that you have for our audience that's here today, or anybody who may be watching the recordings later? We have a couple of minutes left.
I'll say this real quick. I think the audience can benefit from it. It's just something I took from what Michelle said just a second ago when it comes to something to keep in mind, I guess, when you're doing data collection like this, is to be responsive to what you are hearing and what you are receiving, right? So like she was saying, so because especially if you want to continue to have maybe continue to implement it across time, right, with similar groups, and you're being responsive to what you hear, not only in the actual rubrics are related to themselves, but just about the survey. So that kind of real-time feedback, we can make adjustments and things, that would be great. But also just being responsive, because it does incentivize continued, involvement versus it being, well, here they come and ask this again. I'm going to give the ratings. I'm going to give my rationale. I'm going to add this, and then it's just going to go. I don't know where it's going to go. You don't hear back. You want to be responsive to the groups that are generous enough to take their time to care. They care about the resilience of their communities, and they want their voices to be heard. But probably more than that, they want some action too that goes with it. So it goes a long way to buying goodwill and partnership and things like that too. With people in the future, and your own reputation and credibility too. I just think it goes a long way towards all of that stuff. So yeah, so thanks, Michelle, for that, reminding me that we're keeping a lens on that too as well.
Does anybody else have any closing remarks?
Sure. I think I just want to highlight, the diversity of organizational representation we have on the panel here. And I think it's a good reminder to our community groups and our agency groups that are listening today and maybe in the future that, we understand that taking on efforts like Copewell are resource and staffing intensive, but there are departments and partners that can help bolster that, whether it's a university partner that can help with the research arm, community foundations that can help not just with research, but also funding opportunities. So don't hesitate to reach out to people, and, the worst people can say is no. So reach out and do your best to just build that community network.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. That does it for the Q&A. So thank you again to our presenters, Jennifer, Sydney, Michelle, Rex. That was great. Thank you for the insights. And thank you to the audience too for submitting some questions. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Jessica Schneider.
Thank you, Emily. And again, I want to reiterate thank you to our presenters, Jennifer and Sydney, Michelle and Rex, for sharing your experiences with us. It's so important, I think, and helpful to hear these real examples about what this looks like in practice. These examples also demonstrate what John and Monica and Tara reiterated to us on Tuesday, which is, that is the flexibility of this model and the types of organizations that can be involved to take lead and really lead these efforts. And also how Copewell can be adapted to meet the needs of a local community. Another thing that really stood out to me in all of these discussions today was this theme of relationship building and collaboration and fostering connections that are really critical to solving these significant issues of resilience and recovery. And it sounds like that includes reaching out to organizations that you already know and you've already built trust with, but it's also about building relationships that didn't necessarily exist before going through this process. I want to very quickly go back to the question that someone had asked about our center partnering with other universities in Texas to implement Copewell. And Rex said he wouldn't speak for our center, but I will. And my short answer is yes. We wholeheartedly believe in the importance of collaboration. And, we know that the more folks that we work with, the more impact that we're going to have in our state. And so, yes, please reach out to us and we'll see what a collaborative effort might look like. So again, thank you all. And continuing on this theme of collaboration and community, I want to transition to the results of our word cloud activity from Tuesday. So I know this is the moment you've all been waiting for. At the beginning of day one, we asked you all to share 1 or 2 words about the factors that are necessary for improving community resilience. And as you can see, a lot of terms rose to the top: preparedness, mitigation, information, resources, etc. And it is true that all of these factors are super important, but I want you all to see what happened after you learned about Copewell. Here, the terms that emerged were communication and community. And we could not have anticipated that this would happen. And so it was really exciting to see it, because the results of this poll really reflect and drive home the ultimate message here. And that is that Copewell is about building community. On Tuesday, John mentioned that the philosophical basis of Copewell is that, coping well, as he put it, is truly a whole community affair. He said, and I quote, that the point is to get people together. So this is about identifying your stakeholders. It's about understanding who those stakeholders represent and making those voices heard. And most significantly, it's about what that looks like in your community. We know every community is unique, and this model is designed to speak to those differences. I want to call back to a couple of other points that the Copewell team made on Tuesday that really stood out to me. Monica echoed John's message that I mentioned earlier by really driving home the idea that simply going through this process can strengthen a community's resilience, because you're fostering more social capital and cohesion, and you're helping the folks who are invested in a community's resilience develop their group problem-solving skills. So when a community is faced with a hazard event, they have the tools they need as a community to better respond and recover. Tara also shared with us that some of their Copewell users have found that this process actually helps to break down barriers and finger pointing and the like that can sometimes accompany these disasters, because it gives folks a framework to work together toward a common goal. And so one of the points that we want to close with today is that bringing together people from different organizations with different perspectives about recovery is critical to implementing actionable recommendations that will improve your community's functioning and ultimately, ideally, reduce the impact of these hazard events. So, these events are going to happen, and it's about how we respond as a community that matters. So now that we know about Copewell and we have a better understanding of the factors that build resilient communities, what are our next steps? This is where I want to share more information about the opportunities for support that I mentioned earlier to you all. Again, our goal is not only to introduce you to this model, but to identify organizations that are interested in implementing Copewell and to help you do so in your community. So after this town hall, you will all receive a survey that includes questions about what you learned, your major takeaways, etc. But it will also ask you if you are interested in working with our center's Community Health and Economic Resilience Research team, SHARE, to implement Copewell in your community. Please complete this survey, and then we'll start working on what that support might look like for you. Our goal is to start with a couple of communities in Texas, where we can provide resources and support to help you implement Copewell, and to then assess that implementation as a process. As our executive director, Melinda Villagrán, mentioned earlier this week, our center's mission is to translate and share research. We want to make sure that this amazing science gets used by the communities that need it. We understand that organizations often struggle with a lack of time or staffing to make these things happen. And so we want to take away those barriers and work with you to improve your community's resilience. So one last time, please complete our survey, and we'll look forward to your feedback and your responses. So to formally wrap things up, I want to thank the Copewell team at Johns Hopkins University, John, Monica, and Tara, as well as our use case presenters, Jennifer, Sydney, Michelle, and Rex, for sharing their knowledge and experiences with our audience. I also want to thank our co-sponsor, the Texas Rural Health Association. And I especially want to thank all of you who joined us on these 2 days to learn about Copewell. Thank you so much again, and we look forward to hearing from you.